Just because you love somebody and you're married to them doesn't mean that you can talk to them any way you want.
Did you know that around 67% of marriages break because of communication problems? And this is a study that's been done by the American Academy of Matrimonial Lawyers. Today, I have with me Barbara Diehl. She's a licensed counselor who helps in therapy, and she's going to be talking to us about how to communicate better with your partner. So let's dive right into it and welcome Barbara. Welcome, Barbara. I'm so excited to have you on the show today. Before we dive into this very, very interesting topic of communication with your partner, can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself and what are the different kinds of strategies or help that you provide to your clients?
Well, Rashanka, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here today. I'm Barbara Diehl. I'm a licensed clinical professional counselor. I've been in practice for more than 40 years. I see people from the ages 18 on up into their 90s. I do a combination of individual, marital, and family therapy. I offer counseling for anxiety, depression, problems with social functioning, problems with work, family, work-life balance, grief issues, that whole gamut of life's problems that come in.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. You're basically covering all the problems that our generation is going through these days.
Yeah.
Anxiety and depression being the top two. But today I want to talk about communication with your partner, whether it's your husband, wife, or girlfriend, boyfriend. In my personal experience, I've noticed that two people who love each other a lot often have a very hard time communicating openly because they don't want to upset their partner or hurt their feelings. Is that the right way to think about communicating with your partner? And how should one handle such communications which are not easy to address?
Well, it takes a long time to really get to know your partner, to really understand the nuances of your partner, their frame of reference, their family of origin, their culture. And people aren't used to thinking about all the nuances that it really takes to understand their partner. And so they get frustrated, they get upset, they get hurt, they feel alienated if somebody doesn't kind of get it, because marriage is really hard work. It takes a lot of work to get to know somebody. And when you're young and you don't have much experience with the larger world, and in our culture, we're not given those kind of tools to, like, how do you listen? How do you work together as a team? Because in the United States, we come from a very individual kind of mentality. It's all about like the individual and achievement. And so, unless you are lucky enough to be born in a very cooperative, team building kind of family, it's a very difficult paradigm shift to go as an individual to falling in love, to having all these wonderful experiences of getting to know somebody, to really being able to work as a team and to be able to put your like ego aside and not be so interested in always getting your point of view across, but actually sitting down and listening to somebody. Because a lot of the issues that couples struggle with are very hotbed issues like money, parenting, sex, families are really these big balls of fire that people don't know how to navigate well. And it takes years of learning and struggling to know how to do that, unless you're like an incredibly patient, understanding person that was interested in really understanding rather than getting your own point across. So it's not surprising to hear of, a couple that loves each other very, very deeply, but don't know how to navigate, how to talk to each other about their differences and about what's really important to them and how to work together to come to resolve problems, because it's a team. What's going to work for us together to be able to solve a problem and move forward as a couple and as a family, no matter what the hotbed issue is.
You brought up a great point. You said that couples sometimes have a problem talking about whether it's money, finances, sex, or just generally if their emotional needs are not being met in that relationship. But one of the partners could be traveling a lot and the other one's alone at home and doesn't get to see their partner very often. Does it make sense to be quiet about this just so that there's peace in the family, or it makes sense to kind of just speak your mind and ask for what you want? And a follow up to that question is also women these days do not talk about their needs, whether it's emotional needs being met or sexual needs being met, mostly thinking that, the men may get offended or this may disrupt the peace in the house. Do you think it's important to talk about these things openly? Because if you don't really talk about it to keep peace, it can eat you up and then eventually lead to depression and anxiety and all those problems. So, what is an effective way of communicating with your partner about these topics?
Well, it's a great question. And I agree with you about the resentment and bitterness that can build up if you don't really able to share what you're feeling. I think it's a combination. I think it's important to say how you feel, but it's how you do it and when you do it and how you do it and how you deliver it as important as the content of what you're saying. So I'm always going to be interested in talking to somebody in a way that they can hear it. So if I'm going to be shouting at the partner, well, you didn't do this right and you didn't do this and I'm feeling this way and blah, 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 blah. Nobody, but if you said, oh, hey, I want to segue back to something that you said earlier and I want to share with you what I'm feeling and what I'm thinking. Is this a good time? Are you too tired? Are you able to listen now? I think the delivery needs to be when you're feeling calm, when you're not angry, when you've had some time to think about how you want to say it. Because what's the point of screaming and yelling? Nobody's going to hear that. So if I'm upset with, my partner because, okay, he's not really listening to me. Well, your partner could have ADHD and it's somebody that really, can only, pay attention to one thing at a time or can't process as quickly as you process. Or the wife who says to the husband, I want to solve it now, right now. And the husband may say, I can't because I don't know how I feel. Because somebody else may take days to process how they feel. And the wife may say to me, what do you that he needs to take days to figure out how he feels? I know how I feel. Well, but everybody's not you. And people take a longer time to connect, especially people who've come from repressive backgrounds where they're not allowed to connect to how they feel. They've been dominated by a parent. It may take them longer to connect how they feel.
That makes sense. So, do you think having like hard rules in a relationship where partners kind of agree that, hey, there's going to be no yelling, screaming, there's going to be no silent treatment, and no walking out and banging doors? Do you think it makes sense to like kind of define these ground rules and then just always try to stick to that? Is that a good way to kind of manage conflict?
Yeah, I think that's very helpful. I mean, you have to have some boundaries and some ways of interacting. Just because you love somebody and you're married to them doesn't mean that you can talk to them any way you want. People feel like they can let it all hang out at home and they're much better behaved at work than they are with their own family. And so having some ground rules and having some bumpers there to kind of protect the relationship in each other. So being able to say, let's kind of figure out some rules of our game, of our family, and what we're going to do when things kind of fall off the rails. We're to say, hey, Kate, there needs to be a timeout, but there also needs to be where you say time in where it's at some point, whether it's a day, whether it's a few hours, to be able to kind of come to some agreement about when there's a time back in and we feel more level headed to talk about things. Because sometimes a timeout allows you to think about what the partner said. It allows you to calm down and process what you're feeling and to process what your partner said. And you need some of that to kind of figure it out and go, okay, like I see the point of something. So that you can come back and say, okay, is this what you're trying to tell me? And the person may say, yeah. If the person is once heard and they feel like they're being heard, they're going to calm down and feel like, okay, my partner hears me. So then I'm much better to listen what he or she has to say. So sometimes that timeout allows you to work all of that through and figure it out and come back and say your piece in a much more respectful way to your partner.
When the couple is together without the children or families, it's usually a more peaceful environment in the house. The
Yes.
moment topics about the children or responsibilities come in, or the in laws get involved, conflict completely takes over the household. Why is that? And I'm going to bring in a little bit of the in laws, how partners end up fighting so much over their own parents. And how should they handle such situations?
Well, I think that's why talking and talking conversationally throughout your marriage is so important. You've got to be able to keep your finger on the pulse of the relationship and what's happening with yourself and with your partner. If you struggle with your own self-worth, it's hard for you to kind of assert and verbalize what you're feeling because there's so much self-doubt, there's so much anxiety about your self-worth that it's hard to always communicate. So in the individual themselves, there's a lot going on that they're trying to process, and that also begins to hinder how they communicate with their partner because they're either worried about the conflict, they're feeling anxious about it, or they're feeling they want to be loved, and their love has been conditional, in their own upbringing. So it becomes hard, and they project that conditional love into the relationship. So it's hard for them to say to their partner, hey, listen, I want to talk with you about your family coming over, or I want to talk with you about setting some boundaries with them. And then, if your partner has problems with his own parents around that, then that's like a double whammy, because the partner may struggle not only with what you're feeling, but what he or she is feeling as their partner with their own set of parents about how to set boundaries. Or what if you have a man or a woman that has never set boundaries with his parents, and then his wife or her husband says, oh, we need to set some boundaries. Then the partner feels in the middle between the wife and the family, or the husband and the family. And so it really becomes very conflictual rather than conversational. So there's a lot that's operating. So you can see how emotionally laden any kind of conversation is when, like, maybe in-laws come to stay, or even when they come over. Like, I remember this with one couple where the wife says, my mother-in-law comes into the home and she doesn't talk to me. She just sits there. She doesn't ask questions. She doesn't really have a great relationship with my husband. And she goes, I feel really awkward and I feel really uncomfortable. Well, we spent a lot of sessions talking about her mother-in-law, and the mother-in-law ended up being somebody very depressed, had no social skills, was emotionally abused in the marriage. It wasn't that she was trying to be hurtful or mean or cruel to her daughter-in-law, which was my patient, but she didn't know she didn't have the social skills. Well, when you're that depressed and you feel that poorly about yourself, and you've never been taught social skills, and you're 58 years old, there's a lot of damage there. So this particular client had to, like, enlarge her framework of how she saw things. It wasn't really about her. It was about that her mother-in-law was suffering with a lot of social anxiety, poor self-worth. And that's what the client was picking up when she kept saying, it's so uncomfortable, it's so awkward. And so, that's just a minor example of some of the things that can go on that people have to deal with and kind of enlarge their framework of seeing things. So it takes a mature person to be able to, like, put their issues aside, their ego aside, not start fighting with their husband. Oh God, your mother, I can't stand her. She hates me. And the husband's going, well, she doesn't hate you, but he doesn't know how to verbalize that his mother socially and mentally is not a really well woman. And maybe if he had communicated that, or if he understood it, but he probably didn't understand it himself. because look what he was raised by. So it gets complicated.
Do you think in situations like these, or anytime there's conflict between husband and wife over in laws, it's better for the partner to talk to the in laws directly or go through their partner?
Well, I think you've got to be respectful of your partner and say, hey, I'm feeling this, and I wanted to share with you what I'm feeling about your mother or your father, and this is what I'm struggling with. And the partner's going to listen, and you can say to the partner, do you feel comfortable if I were to talk with your mom or your dad about this? So I don't think you should put your partner and have this be a surprise thing for him to hear about, like, oh, you've talked to your mother or your father-in-law. But I do think that you need to give the respect to your partner and say, this is what I'm feeling. This is what I would like to talk with you about. Are you comfortable with that? Because it's really bothering me. And how do we address this as a couple together?
Barbara, I definitely want to do a part two with you. But going back to communication with partners, there's a research study done where 1 out of 6 marriages in the United States are interracial or interethnic, which means that your parenting style is going to be very different, right?
Mhm.
And once that is different, it kind of leads to conflict between two partners because one wants it one way, the other wants it the other way. Should partners pick one way just to avoid confusion in the child's mind, or it's better to meet somewhere halfway? And how does one kind of navigate these conversations and conflicts?
Well, so if you've got a couple, one is from the United States and one is, let's say, from Africa, and they have two very distinct styles. I think if the child and the family is living in the United States, it's all about helping the child to adapt to be the most successful person they can be here and living in the United States, because that's where they live. That's the norm. That's the culture that they're growing up in. So I think for the sake of the child, it's better to raise them in a way that helps them to be the most successful person with the best chance of adjustment here in the United States.
In the
If they're
country
living,
where the
yes,
couple
in
is
the country
residing.
that they're living in. So if that couple were to move back to Africa, then it's about helping that child adjust in the most successful way they can to that culture. So, because that's the culture the child is ultimately going to have to be raised in. And so it's all about helping your child make the best adaptation they can make in the country that they're living in.
Wow, I love that advice. And that makes so much sense, especially because I am married to a Caucasian man and we have different parenting styles, but we've started doing exactly this, like, helping our child grow up in the culture that exists here in the city that we live in instead of, trying to confuse the child. So I just love that advice. Thank you for that.
Yeah. And they can appreciate a lot of things about their parents' culture, whether it's from India, whether it's from Africa, or whether it's from South America. Those things are so important to integrate and to appreciate about somebody's culture or their different religion. But if they're going to be here, the adjustment has to be to help the child to adapt here in the culture that they're living in, because otherwise it can get very, very confusing for a child.
Makes sense. What about finances? A lot of people have already worked quite a bit before they get married. They kind of have a savings. Do you think it's important to share your financial details with your partner about that?
Well, I think, you have to have trust in a relationship and a marriage. It's, one of the bedrocks of marriage is trust. And so if everything needs to be open, everything needs to be talked about. And that doesn't mean that there has to be agreement, but you do have to be open about what the finances are. That stuff needs to be talked about, and that needs to be very open. What you both bring to it, what you're both making, because without that, without the trust in every level of a marriage, you're rocking the foundation of the relationship. A shared account or separate accounts, whatever. I think what's more important is to talk about being open about what the money is, how the money's spent, what you're going to do with the money, what are the goals of the money, what's the income, what's the output, and to be on the same page about those kinds of things.
That makes sense. Barbara, there's some studies that show that couples who kind of practice active listening or end up having fewer conflicts. Do you think that is the key to a happy marriage? Just like actively listening to your partner and really focusing on what they need?
Well, I think that active listening is a component of every successful relationship, whether it's a marriage, whether it's a parent child, whether it's a work relationship or friend relationship, of being able to actively listen and not being interested in getting your point across and can't wait to say what you want to say is just a problem in our society in general. But I definitely think it's really helpful in a marriage to be able to have time where you're talking to somebody and they're actually listening to you and hearing you and being able to say, even back to you, this is what I hear you saying. And do I have that right? Am I understanding that right? And the other partner saying, yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. That's really helpful, that's really important to me. So that person who feels like they've been understood and really being listened to is in a much better shape to be able to actively listen back because they actually feel like they've been heard. So they're not fighting to get their point across, they're not butting in, they're not waiting with bated breath to get more words out because they actually feel like they've been heard. And it's so helpful. And it's the same thing with a child,
Mhm.
being able to actively listen and to be respectful because it starts very, very early. And it starts very, very early in the relationship and the marriage as well. These are the building blocks, being able to listen, to have trust, to have support, to have somebody that actually is understanding where you feel like, oh, this person really gets it. It makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's something that I try to practice every day. It's hard,
It is
but
hard.
it is very hard to do with
It
everyone,
is.
every relationship in our life. But
Yep.
Barbara, before we end things, can you give some advice to couples or partners that can help them build a better relationship? What are one or two good communication strategies that they can use on a daily basis?
I think touching base and being connected and talking, like, how are you today? How did the day go? Is there anything that you need from me? Being able to, clue your partner in to what's going on, what you're feeling, not just walking in the house and plopping down and not talking. Or as one couple said, boy, she says, my boyfriend came in the house and he went right up to the bedroom and he went to lay down. He didn't even tell me that he was home. And she goes, all it would have taken is him coming in and saying, hey, I'm here. I'm
Mhm.
sorry, honey, I don't feel well. I'm going to go lay down. I really just don't feel up to anything tonight. And it would have made all the difference in the world. But because he didn't do that, she goes, I just feel invalid. And so talking to each other, being respectful of each other's just persona really goes a long way.
That's fantastic advice. I think just doing that with every relationship is so important in today's
It,
world where we all are so busy with work
yeah.
and life and just everything in general.
Yeah, well, it is, but it's the ingredient of every relationship, and that's why they say relationships take much work because this is work. The experience and living longer and understanding makes life a little bit easier. There is some good points about getting older because it helps you to get along better with people.
Well, thank you so much, Barbara. It's been such a pleasure having you today, and I would love to have you back for part two on communication with in laws.
Sure, it's been my pleasure. Anytime, you're welcome.